Hey there, welcome to the Joint Dynamics podcast. My name is Andrew Cox. I'm one of the owners and directors of a company here in Hong Kong called Joint Dynamics. Actually, it's just outside of that door, just there. I'm also the host of our podcast, the curator of our podcast. And today, my most special guest is Stephanie Ng. So, Stephanie, if you missed it, was on episode 31, which we just worked out, we established was over
Uh,
2.5 years ago.
wow.
Who is Stephanie, you ask? So Stephanie is the founder and director of Banter. She's a Ph.D. candidate in health communication. She's got a master's in psychology, and she's the author of the newly released book, Big Bites, Break Boundaries.
You nailed it.
Got it without,
Amazing.
I had to practice that like 10 times to get it right. Hey, Stephanie, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Really excited to be here again. When you said that it's been 2.5 years since episode 31, I can't believe it. It's wild. And also it's so great to be back in a similar space, but in a new headspace. So it's a really cool contrast. And I'm happy to be back in conversation with you as well.
Thank you very much. And today again is with Monday Live. So we're going on YouTube or through the podcast platform. So it's going to be great. Let's kick off with who is Stephanie Ng? For those crazy people that haven't listened to episode 31, can you tell us a little bit about you and maybe what made you now?
Yeah, for sure. And previously when we were chatting before the podcast started, you mentioned that one of the quotes that I'd shared from last time was "Your mess is your message," and it was a quote that I didn't even remember that I'd said to you, back in episode 31, but it holds true to this day. And it's actually the quote that I have put at the back of my book, and is a lot of the impetus behind writing the book and doing a lot of the work that I do. So the work that I do today really focuses on lived experiences of mental illness and mental health recovery. And kind of that is the theme that I circle around over and over, whether it's in Body Banter's work, or in my PhD research. And I think it's going to be something of consistent interest to me. But this really stemmed from my own personal experiences with a mental illness in my teens. And if you've listened to episode 31, I talk about my experiences with an eating disorder in Hong Kong and navigating that within Hong Kong's cultural context. The challenges of talking about my experiences, not just in a public space. I didn't even know how to do that back then. Mental health advocacy was so far from my world because, first of all, I didn't even think about, I had to address my own stuff before I could kind of use my stuff to help others. So at the time, I was still working through my own stuff. And something that I really noticed was that the stigma surrounding mental illness in Hong Kong was one of the factors that prevented me from accessing the support that I needed. First of all, because I didn't know how to ask for the support, how to look for the resources, and therefore wasn't able to find resources that were really able to support me until later on in the illness, when my physical state and my psychological state was very, very bad.
Yeah. Just for the
Yeah,
context,
sure.
how old were you and how many years ago was this?
This was, I would say, the kind of the darkest days of the eating disorder, when I really noticed something going on in my life, was when I was 16. Yeah, so that was a final 2 or 3 years of high school.
Yeah.
So this was, and wanted to highlight that it was the darkest parts, just because previous to that, before I was 16, I'd already been spiraling downwards. But because of the lack of resources to even detect the symptoms of an eating disorder, I didn't know until I started to have physical manifestations of those symptoms, and people could really see it on me, in the sense that, my body changed. I lost a lot of weight. I looked like I was going through a really hard time. And then people were like, "Oh, it looks like you need to seek help." And I don't think it should ever get to that point. Mental illnesses should have early detection and prevention for young people, especially, in my opinion, just because there's so much that can be done in terms of prevention work and early intervention. It can be so helpful for a young person.
Holy cow, you've just brought up, let's be practical for a moment. Let's be practical for a moment. So let's go the dark times. I'm assuming your eating disorder sort of, it's an insidious onset. Yeah, it's not as if one day you wake up. So what were the starting? There's a bit of background noise for everybody. Welcome to the Joint Dynamics podcast, everyone. Wilson just
Beautiful sound.
you just turned on my computer somehow. We were just, side note, we were just talking about Mercury retrograde, everyone, of which I know nothing about, but apparently things go crazy and we're just living through it right now. Anyway, back to Stephanie and the podcast with me at the moment. I was just saying how I'm assuming eating disorder. Do we call it anorexia nervosa anymore, or that term? Is that a real term still?
Yeah,
It
that's
is.
one of the eating disorders.
That's one of the eating disorders. Thank you. This is an education for me, so thank you again. So it's an insidious onset.
Mhm.
And I know everybody's story is different, and it's not. I don't expect your story to reign across. This is what happened to me, but I believe there might be principles that people around that care for people might be able to pick up early.
Yeah.
What would you say were, if you were to reverse back and through the wisdom you have now going through that, what would have been one of the first, before the dark times, what would have been one of the first signs that would have been almost like a subtle bit of a canary in the coal mine, or a red flag that would have went, whoa, something's going on here?
Yeah. So speaking of insidious onset, some of the early symptoms are not what I would call, dangerous looking. They're just kind of things that maybe should make your ears perk up.
Yeah.
Perhaps curiosity from a family member. So one of those signs was just starting to become more obsessive over eating routines and exercising routines. Maybe even just talking more about those things. It's like, oh, I should really go and try out this workout routine. Oh, I feel like I really need to eat this way. Why? Because it's healthier. So just using words like I should be doing this. If I don't do this, I'll feel really bad about myself. Attaching personal worth to exercise and eating routines. So this kind of language and the relationship between that can be early signs that this person is starting to link those two things together. Certainly was the case for me. Just the use of language and changes in my daily routines. So maybe I started to dedicate a little bit more time to looking at cookbooks or looking at different YouTube videos talking about exercising and eating, ways of eating, diet plans, things like that. So increased interest in those things. And again, these aren't, it's not to say that this is, oh, that person is struggling already. These are early phase.
That, don't we? Yeah.
And perhaps just something that family members, friends can be curious about. So like, hey, what are you watching? Like, what are these things that, why is this interesting to you? Or if maybe that sounds a bit too nosy, or you're a teenager,
No,
go away.
and the door and close the door. Yeah. But that's actually another excellent point, isn't it? Like the parent caregivers, the people around you that love you. I think that obviously your PhD in health communication, so you're very good at understanding how to use language. But it's really cool that you chose the word curious, because I imagine we're coming through that. I'm a parent, coming through the lens of a parent. If I was to come across that and think, oh my goodness, my child is now suffering from an eating disorder, I may not be curious. I may be, with the best of intentions that every parent would have to protect their child, I may be overbearing, and you've got to stop that and not understand. So I think that's a really important point to start with, isn't it? The nature and the beauty of curiosity. Because you won't push me away if I'm just curious, I'm assuming, as much.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it comes in stages as well. And I would caveat that with saying that curiosity in the early, maybe starting stages of the eating disorder, when it's starting to affect the person's life, those early signs, like, for example, becoming a little bit more obsessive or more interest in topics related to eating and exercising or body image, those are some early signs. Maybe the kid is starting to isolate themselves from social situations because they're spending more time at the gym or in exercising routines, or spending time trying to control their eating behaviors. So these kinds of small behaviors accumulated and starting to affect the child's life, and interfere with their daily routines, their interactions with friends and family members, and their interests and their hobbies, maybe even school, they're starting to slip behind. And this is not the most kind of important indicator of
Yeah.
struggle, but it can be one of the warning signs as well. So at that stage, I think curiosity is very valuable because it's when the parent or the caregiver or some loved one can say, "Hey, I noticed that something is a bit different about you. Can we talk? I'm here to support you. If you are not ready to talk right now, just know that if you need support, I'm here." So that's curiosity at the early stages.
Yeah.
If the person is struggling immensely in their physical state, let's say they're malnourished,
The dark times, can we
the
say?
dark times,
Yeah.
there is a chapter in my book called Death Day. It's dark humor and I laugh at it all the time. But
Isn't it great?
alliterated. Yeah, but it was a dark day.
Yeah.
They couldn't detect my pulse. I was
Oh, no joke.
yeah, and
Oh, sorry.
it was just one of those, but it was a wake up moment. It was like, okay, so time to really get up and recover.
Sorry, just all sort of, that was a real day. They
It
couldn't
was-
detect your pulse.
Yeah, so it had been
no.
quite a difficult, I had not been treating my body the way that I would like to. And it got to a point where my body was really just starting to deteriorate to a very, very poor physical state. And I went to a psychiatrist who I think I might have seen this person once or twice, and I hadn't received any form of medication at the time. And he was just like, this is the like kind of the turning point. Like if you don't kind of pick yourself up from this moment, we're going to hospitalize you, and we're going to need to give you medication. So it was a huge turning point for me. And I mentioned this day or this experience because I think when it gets to that point, curiosity is not going to do the job.
Yeah.
Like there does need to be a certain degree of, I care about you and maybe you'll hate me in this moment, but I'm going to I needed some decision making to be done for me. And my mom did that for me in that moment. And my family did that for me in the moment. I was not hospitalized because my family knew my GP well, and he was a family doctor who was a friend as well. So it was organized for me to stay home and recuperate from the physical implications of the eating disorder. But yeah, it really took that. It was forceful in a good way.
Yeah.
I needed that. I needed someone, I needed family members to be like, you're going to eat now. We're going to be there with you as compassionate as possible, but we're going to structure your daily routines so that you eat enough and you recuperate physically. And it took an immense amount of love to do that. So I highlight that.
Wow.
Different curiosity, early stages, prevention, kind of getting to understand a child who may be slipping into disordered eating behaviors. And then when it comes to the death day, or, I really hope no kid ever has to reach that stage before getting support. But if that does happen, curiosity won't do the trick. So yeah.
So tough love is another potential for that one. You were saying sometimes you just got to create structure and.
Yeah, I hesitate to say that this is prescriptive in nature. Like
Yeah, no, and thank you
it's
for saying
going
that.
to work for every
Yeah.
person. I'm just saying that in my situation.
Yeah.
And especially I think when it comes to a life or death situation, it would probably be helpful for a loved one to be there a little bit more, a little firmer with the approach and say, I really see that, this is a situation where I would strongly encourage you to get support, and I can come with you if that's going to be helpful for you. So yeah, I do
Got
think
it.
that perhaps for younger people who struggle with eating disorders, it might be easier for a parent to intervene in that way and to accompany the child or to, take it into their hands. But if, let's say, it's a flown adult, I know of lots of cases where it's been quite difficult actually for family members or friends to support the person because the person thinks that. And, it's their own decision to make as to whether they'll ultimately seek support.
So that's
Yeah, it's tough. It's really hard.
Yeah, mate.
Yeah.
So I guess one more question. Let's call that a little bit of your origin story, your lived experience.
Yeah.
Mental health and an eating disorder. Um, have you sat down with your mum and dad and spoke about that? Yeah, okay, when you came out the other side, high five to you, mate. That's amazing, and to your family and the medical practitioners that you had. So
Definitely.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but let's just say 6 months ago, did one day did you wake up and go? And if I get this wrong, you just say, no, Andrew, that doesn't happen, or you can't do this wrong way. But let's just say if I, in the best possible way that I can, I put myself in your shoes, and then I go as a parent and as a son of you, Hanko, I wonder, do you have a day where you wake up and you go, that eating disorder that I went through, that period that I went through, that was really hard on me. That was really hard
Yeah.
on me. That was also really hard on the people that love me. Let's say my mother and father.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to my mum and dad today and just say, hey, finish the story. Did that ever happen with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, go on, tell us about that. I'm getting live. I'm not sharing. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
man. So tell us about that day, because
Yeah.
that's obviously what your parents went through, and then the way that they supported you, and to who you are now. Far out. You're amazing, to be honest. Um, so can you tell us about that day?
Yeah, and I think about it all the time.
Mm.
I can only speak, or the only reference point I can ever truly understand is my own experience.
Mm.
But then obviously I was a bystander to the experiences of my family members. And there are lots of little stories in the book that are about um, very tender moments that we had, and even within those very difficult times in the recovery process. And there was a lot of conflict and pain because, I think it's quite typical of a Hong Kong family to not have ever had experiences or conversations about mental illness openly until potentially, most likely, if a family member goes through something really hard, or mental illness even, then conversations open up. And this is quite a typical storyline I hear from a lot of people that I speak with today who have experienced mental illness and have had continued to have relationships with their families. Sometimes it doesn't continue because of those hardships, and that can be very painful.
Mm.
But I think a lot about the change and the transformation that went through my family after the experience that I had. And again, it was not by any means an easy one, nor was it a smooth sailing one. But because we went through so much together and we had such open conversations in those moments of confusion and pain, there's nothing that we can't talk about now. And there's an openness and a vulnerability that I don't think would have come out of my family or been fostered in my family circle had it not been for that experience. So there's gratitude there as well. Yeah, and I think whenever we revisit that experience in my teens and the struggles we went through, it's always with a bittersweetness.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, had we not gone through that, maybe we wouldn't be having a conversation as open and as warm as we do now. Yeah, and we had to go through quite a happy time together. But the classic saying, I actually hate the saying that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's nothing else that there's nothing else. You're not just bitching. So
You know what?
say it.
On my piece of paper here, I write down things that come up into my mind. And I wrote down, when we were talking about curiosity, I wrote,
Yeah.
curiosity kills the cat. And then I wrote, question mark. I don't think that's right anymore. Where did it come up with that in this? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
But you had a day, like, to say that there must have been the first day when you felt like I interviewed this guy, Chris Howe, and he has a podcast called Authentic Adversity. And he's very open about his addiction. And he shared in that podcast about addiction and the life that he went through and
Yeah.
the dark times that he had. And then there was a time where I didn't really understand how to communicate. And he said, I said, so you're recovered, you're in recovery. And he said, there was times when I had an active addiction, but I have an addictive behavior. So he deals with addiction, but he's got in place and he's in recovery but he's no longer in active addiction. Is an eating disorder, do you feel the same? Like, or is it I'll let you finish that.
Oh, that's it's such a perfect segue into one of my favorite topics, which is kind of the nonlinear nature of recovery.
Yeah,
And there's this one of my favorite chapters to write in the book is called The Onion. And I don't know whether I actually even talked about that in the previous episode, because I feel like that's one of the recurring metaphors of my life. But it basically talks about how when you're kind of just coming out of a difficult situation, like a mental illness and eating disorder in my case, you're at the center of the onion where it's the stingiest and the smell is the most pungent and it's overwhelming and you don't know what's going on. And smell is almost blinding to the point where you can't cope with anything. Then as you navigate recovery, you're still traveling along the outer layers of the onion, but you're getting farther and farther away from the smell. You're still on the same onion though. So there are points at which you're going to be at the same intersection of the onion where you're going to recognize the same triggers. So for example, in early eating disorder recovery, it might have been extremely restrictive behaviors, completely taking out foods, seeing them as, evil or never thinking that I would never eat them again and not being able to cope with the emotions of guilt if I were to eat more than I thought I should. And then, towards the outer layers of the onion, it might be something like feeling a sense of fullness and feeling guilty for that. So kind of recognizing a similar sense of guilt, but it's a lot more muted. The sensation is a lot more muted, but then it gives you that same sensation of, oh, why am I back here again? The same thing. I'm struggling with the same stuff. Why is this the case? And a lot of people struggle with that experience of relapse and why am I back here again? And what I like to think about is that you're just at the same intersection, but every time you travel along a different layer, you're a little bit more well-equipped to handle that situation. And you've done it so many times before at different layers, at different parts of that onion. So you can do it this time, and I like what you said about Chris
Howell.
Chris Howell.
Yeah.
I'd love to listen to that episode.
Amazing human.
That's so cool.
I think it was episode 96. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm going to go back and listen to that.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah,
sorry, I was.
that.
Did you finish? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, I was wrapping that thought up. It was just saying, getting to those outer layers and, we will most likely grapple with similar, like we are the people we are, and there will be remnants of our past and in our storylines of life.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I don't think that it's a bad thing to struggle with, similar nature of things, but if we can see ourselves as better equipped rather than going back to the same place, then I think it's a different framing.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And where I was heading to with my story of Chris, and I'm going to reframe it now. There was Death Day, and then what was the day that you wake up when you were Gratitude Girl? Can you? There must have been that day where Coca-Cola, Gratitude Girl. Death Day. I'm just playing with marketing now, aren't I? But anyway, there must have been a day when you came out of the darkness and then you felt like, I got this, and maybe your family felt you got this. And did you, Stephanie, did you have a day where you woke up and you went, my God, my parents have been through a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to go tell them that, I think you're tops. That's a terrible way of communicating. Obviously, I'm not doing my Ph.D. on communication.
Well, I'm going to go and call them and say...
yeah, no, Dad, you're tops. Yeah.
Dad.
Quoting Andrew. I believe he's an Australian linguist. Anyway, back to that question. What was there? Honestly, was there a day that you were Gratitude or you woke up and you went, my God, my parents have been through so much and they've helped me so much. I just want to share with them, run up and hug the hell out of them. That onion's making me cry again. I don't know. Was there a day? Was there?
I can't say that there was a day.
There wasn't.
I think it was more of a process.
Yeah.
Yeah, through lots of, actually probably being away from home gave me more of a chance to reflect, when I was in college and then in my master's degree, and I was away from them. And I grew on my own at the time, did a lot of reflecting, did a lot of personal growth and, individual growth as a person. And I think that really helped me. Just see them as people and not just their parents. Yeah, I think that shift as a young adult is one of the biggest ones because you're like, you're a person.
My God, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. And I think parents are supposed to be not flawed for some reason, which is totally not true. Imagine. Hello. Um, okay, then I will conclude this question by pushing you one more time.
Yeah.
Have you had a day where you just went, Mum, Dad, thank you? Like, have you had a gratitude day?
Many times like
Many
that.
times.
Yeah.
Far out. I'm going to do it for you, Mum, Dad. I love you. I think that's
Yeah.
yeah, actually, parents, seriously, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, you talk about a PhD in life, become a parent.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's the
I
best job in the world, but the toughest job in the world.
bet.
You guys wait. Anyway, okay, before we started filming the podcast, before Mercury retrograde kicked in, Wilson had to run off and get a microphone cable. You were saying how you pivoted because last time we spoke, you were commencing your PhD in psychology. And then
The psychology focus. Yeah.
yeah, and now it's health communication. Can you tell us about your PhD now and the organization? So you're doing it at HKU, and then there's an organization here that's helping you. Can you tell us about that? And then let's dive into health communication and how that's going to help some people make the world a better place.
I sure hope so.
I see it every time. The times that I speak to you, Stephanie, I feel good about it because I'm thinking, well, this girl's really, obviously, you can tell the way that you speak and the way you hold yourself, that your heart's in the right place. And I think, well, I get to almost be like a conduit for this amazing person that has such a beautiful message that has been through some stuff, but a lot of people have been through some stuff. And here I am dangerously treading in the world of psychology, but I understand that there's post-traumatic stress disorder and then understand that there's post-traumatic growth disorder. I imagine there's both going on at the same time. But then what I have become aware of is that sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder does become post-traumatic growth disorder while it still is present with the stress disorder. And I sort of feel that that's sort of been your experience to go out and create Body Banter and the work that you're doing with children in school, and you wrote a book on the subject. Would that be sort of an accurate assumption from a quasi uneducated person that just had lots of great conversations with amazing people like you?
No, I think that's accurate to say that. And perhaps, just leading into the work that I'm doing in a PhD,
Yeah.
what I'm noticing about a lot of people's experiences with mental illness is that when they start to share their stories of their experiences, it gives them a chance, and it personally also gave me a chance to restory those experiences and make sense of them. Because when you start to verbalize and put words to something, an experience that has for a long time probably just lived in your own head, it becomes more than a figment of your imagination. You need to structure it so that you can communicate it to other people. And in that process, it becomes the act of telling it in itself changes the nature of that story. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. Really, really interested in the process of constructing and communicating a recovery story for a public anti-stigma purpose. The reason why it's so interesting to me from more of like an anti-stigma, like a public, addressing public stigma surrounding mental illness perspective, is because it's distinct from, let's say, telling a recovery story within a therapeutic setting. For one, in a therapeutic setting, it is the objective of the therapy setting is to address the client's concerns of what's going on in the client's life, to change the client's experience. But when a person is challenged or tasked with trying to put their experiences into words and to think about a way to make that experience relevant to other people and for a greater cause, it again changes the nature of that story. And I'm trying to figure out in my PhD what that process is like for the person, making sense of it in their heads, trying to use different linguistic strategies so that they can make sense of it for themselves as well as for others. And then, and then look at that from an anti-stigma perspective as well. How does that help other people make sense of those experiences when they're listening to it? How does that persuade them to look at mental illness and recovery from a different lens? That's... I think I went a roundabout way to talk to you about my PhD focus.
No.
And then there was a bit more, but I wanted to see whether
Well,
I know.
one of the things, and via that, is there growth, or I should just let go of the post-traumatic growth disorder thing? This doesn't land here.
I think I would.
Thank you for trying to validate with Oi. She's so lovely, isn't she? Uh, she's really nice.
Um, I think it might just be, from what I understand, it might just be post-traumatic growth. Just because I'm definitely not an expert in
Doesn't matter then, mate. Let's not try to
post-traumatic
be.
growth. I'm just gonna say that, have grown from the experience. I don't know whether it's post-traumatic growth, or it can be classified as such, but yeah, I definitely feel like
Fair enough.
evolved.
What I did, what I wanted to go on to from there was when you said linguistic strategies, and is that if I try to understand that a little bit, and we try to understand that a little bit, if I, for example, develop a larger vocabulary around the subjects, that would enable me to have a deeper understanding and then a deeper capacity to be able to convey what I've been through in a way to create meaning. Is that so? Is part of the process
Yeah.
when you say a linguistic strategy, is that literally learning, in this example, the English language more, getting more words, so I have a stronger capacity to create meaning to it? Oh, I'm sad. Well, there's many more ways to feel sad, Andrew. There's morose, and then there's all these other ways in which you describe that. Which one are you? Which gives me another layer of understanding. Would that be somewhere along the lines of a linguistic strategy?
So a linguistic strategy, first of all, I wanted to say that you're on it, because expanding vocabulary surrounding emotional terms actually does help people understand their experiences better, because when you have more words to talk about your experiences, and you've probably seen the emotions wheel, a lot of psychologists like to use it because it helps people dig out the nuances of those emotional experiences. So maybe you're not sad, but maybe you are frustrated. Maybe there's a nuance to that, and there's like, on the emotions wheel, depending on which version you look at, is that there are like kind of smaller pieces of the pie that give you a bit more of a description and give you a bit more. It's like, oh yeah, that taps into my emotion better than the word sad. So it gives granularity to an experience. So yes, vocabulary does help. When I talk about linguistic strategies, it's things like, for example, if someone is going through a really hard time and they're describing an experience that was very painful for them, they might use strategies like distancing strategies, like generalizing the experience, like everyone goes through these kinds of things. Or they might use reported speech. They might say, my mom said blah blah blah. So taking quotes from other people, so as to validate their experience, or to say, see, more people agreed with my experience, to show the authority in the role as a narrator. So these are strategies that narrators can use to add credibility to the storytelling experience. There are also rhetorical strategies. So these are things that a lot of public speakers will use. So just again, reported speech can be one of the rhetorical strategies. People can use, even Obama said this. And so, yeah, these are the kinds of strategies I'm talking about. And I'm interested to see not just how these narrators describe their own experiences, but how they construct a story that makes their painful past experiences, particularly with mental illness that can be quite messy, makes it into something that can be shared out loud, that can be viewed as relevant, and that can be educational and empowering, hopefully, for a public audience as well. Yeah.
And I guess that leads into my HK, the people that are helping with your PhD. And
Yeah.
I mentioned to you, I interviewed OD. I don't know. I don't know what episode it was. So, hey, Dylan, great to speak to you. And she started, or she was looking after the anti-stigma project. Now you're involved in the anti-stigma project. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
Can you tell us a bit about that, and then tell us about your role and even where you want it to go?
Yeah. So I'm a research fellow with MindHK, and that means that my PhD is funded by MindHK, and so I get to work with them in order to look at the anti-stigma work that they're doing to help evaluate that. But also my PhD allows me, or the data that I collect through my PhD, comes straight from a lot of the work that we do within the anti-stigma campaign. So my main data set is actually a lot of the ambassador stories that are told within the anti-stigma campaign when we're doing training sessions for our ambassadors to share in a public context. That's where my data is, and that's where the recordings are from. So I'm very, very fortunate to be working with MindHK, because a lot of times the data collection part of a PhD is the bane of most PhD students' existence. They're like, where do I get all this sensitive data? Who's going to tell me their recovery story? And that, this has made the process a lot more streamlined for me. And I get great stories from people who are there to really vulnerably open up. And I'm always grateful to the ambassadors for letting me use those stories as well, obviously anonymized in the research paper. But I understand that those are very difficult experiences to share, and I'm always grateful for that. Yeah.
And how long have you been involved with
Since the beginning?
So is that 3 years? 4 years?
Yeah, almost 4 years, because I have one more year of the PhD left.
And so in that 4 years, that sort of gives you a snapshot of, let's say, how Hong Kong is doing in the world of mental health, how we're doing it. And have you noticed things have got better over the 4 years, or things have been the same, or there's been ups and downs? The vicissitudes of success are a little bit like that, maybe, are they, hopefully?
Yeah,
or it's no.
I think, and many people will probably have noticed this, since COVID hit the world.
Straight. Yeah.
There has been more conversation about mental health and mental health issues, and I think people are more aware that anyone can struggle with some degree of mental distress. I would say that the awareness is a little bit of a double-edged sword, particularly in Hong Kong, because now that we have more open conversations about mental health, and certain mental health diagnoses are almost more comfortable to be talked about because they don't touch upon some of the more difficult parts about a mental illness experience. So, for example, disorders like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, they don't always have a behaviorally deviant component that could imply that there could be harm caused to other people. So for example, like with schizophrenia, that can have the person with schizophrenia can have hallucinations, and this means that they can behave in ways that are seen as deviant in let's say Hong Kong society, in broader societal standards. People might see this as strange, or even, oh, this person has the potential to be violent. And when these kinds of mental illnesses come about, there is more stigma attached to it because there's more uncertainty as to what this person could behave like. But then there's no conversation about it because people are uncomfortable to look at the messiness of that kind of diagnosis, versus an experience like depression, or a disorder like depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. It's kind of seen as within the individual. It's much easier to talk about because there's almost the sense that, oh, it's your problem. We can talk about it and we can have sympathy for you because it's not my problem. And when it becomes, how can we change structures and systems to support people who are really struggling on a day-to-day basis, who deserve support, and systemic change to make these structures so that these people can improve their lives. We don't want to talk about that stuff because it takes a lot more work.
Yeah.
It's a lot messier to talk about that. So that's my opinion. It's good to see more conversations, but there's not enough nuance, not nearly enough nuance to them.
If you were to offer up a dream that you have for Hong Kong, in the way that we navigate mental health, what would you share?
I honestly think, and I'm really excited to be part of the anti-stigma campaign with Mind, because and to just be part of a time when people are starting to be interested in these topics, because it's the starting of what I hope to see. Just people being more open to having conversations, to listening to people's stories. And again, I don't think, I don't expect it to be perfect on day one, then it's impossible to kind of expect people to change overnight. And I have a lot of empathy for people who are scared to broach conversation about mental illness. It's not easy for, including myself, even understanding different diagnoses beyond my own. It's a challenge, and we all have to work hard to do that. But the dream is for everyone to keep trying. to keep trying to understand. It goes beyond mental illness experiences, like general human experiences of, different perspectives. Getting out of our echo chambers is important. So
Yeah, I come across the term the other day, neurodiverse,
yeah.
and it was in relationship to on the spectrum in that conversation around Asperger's and neurodiverse, and then the way that the person described it to me, it was, well, people see things differently. Other people see things that they see it through a different hat. They see it through different eyes. They feel it differently. And neurodiversity, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's actually valuable to get diversity in the way that we see the world. I thought that was a really good term for me to land on, to go, well, that's actually a great way to describe that, and actually a great way for me to come to understand it as well, as opposed to a label. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with diagnoses or labels. I understand that there can be a good and bad for those from a diagnosis that can lead to a scientific strategy because we've understood this diagnosis for a long time. But when you label me, and I imagine with mental health, if you label me and you say, Andrew, you have a broken arm, I can see that the bone is broken, and there you are. I have a strategy. I will put you in a cast, for example. But when the diagnosis is mental health, I'm sure everybody can see the difficulty there. And is there moments where I would second, do I have mental health? Because that person doesn't believe me, and they're questioning that I have mental health, because that there's no real physical manifestation outwardly that I can see from across the room or whatever. That it's not a cough, it's not a runny nose, it's not a broken bone. It's internal, and it's the way that in the theater of my mind and how I express myself there. That must be a real challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a belief in it. I don't think it's limited to the Hong Kong context, but this strong belief that, especially in very fast-paced societies, where I think it's very linked actually, when people have quick judgments about things and about people, it's very linked to the pace of life that we have. We're like, I don't have time for a conversation, so I'm going to like look at you and assume things about you. This is my opinion. So this is not fact. I don't think I've seen any research on it. It's just something that I find quite interesting. And I, through different conversations, I can see this to be the case in Hong Kong society. We're quick to skip conversations because we're like, no one wants to hear my stuff. And when other people assume the same. So I think that leads to a sense that when it comes to illnesses or ailments or difficulties, they need to be visible in order to be valid. And I think all of this is very tied: fast-paced society, quick assumptions and judgments, and kind of this expectation that if someone's struggling, it needs to be shown clearly. Otherwise, it's not real.
Yeah, that's a great point. You hear people say all the time, I don't have the mental space for this right now.
Yeah.
And in that context, you can say, look, just give me a diagnosis.
Yeah.
So then I can move on. I can park that, deal with it, and move on. Whereas the nuances of what you shared, it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Definitely.
What would be great right now to sort of personalize this? Can you give me a great story? Because we can do both sides actually, but let's start with a good one. And the person's name can be Joe, Sis, whatever you choose, whatever. But share a great story, just to illustrate the work you've done, the progress we've made here in Hong Kong, globally even. Can you share a great story?
Andrew, I do have to run soon. So
Great story.
a buzz.
And then,
But I'll
got it, mate. Yeah, got
just conjure up.
it. Mercury retrograde. Anyway, great story, mate. Shoot. Give me the great story.
Buzz, I'm sad to leave, but I'll leave you with a great story.
Hey, that's enough. Yeah, let's finish on a high.
Yeah.
We've climbed a mountain. We're going to stop up there, everyone. Here we go. Give us a great story.
Yeah, I'll share a great story from it's actually a story from one of our ambassadors at Mind. And it's something that has been recurrent in our different ambassador stories when they talk about familial support, and what support feels like. And there's this great Cantonese saying that's called "Pui Wen Tong Hang," and it means to walk alongside, shoulder to shoulder. And this is what a lot of people, I think this term captures the feeling of empathy in the most accurate way, or the most it hits home when people use this or to describe the feeling of empathy. Because I think a lot of times when people describe empathy, they think standing in someone else's shoes. It means completely understanding that person's situation, or I think a lot of people assume that empathy means that you can fully grasp what this person has gone through, to feeling with them. But I don't think that's true. And in fact, what a lot of people have described from the receiving end of empathy is just that that person is at a level state with them. It's like sitting next to you. It's like you and me right now. We're having a conversation. You're curious about my experience. You're trying to understand and see that particular experience from a similar, maybe using your own experiences to empathize and to relate to my experience. You might not fully understand my experience, but that's not a prerequisite for extending empathy. And so I think that particular story that the ambassador shared, he was talking about this particular term as a way to capture it. And he was saying it's like walking shoulder to shoulder. And I always, always remember that. And it's one of the most beautiful stories.
Say that in Cantonese one more time.
Poi bun tong hang. It literally means like to accompany and to walk together. To accompany and to walk together. Yeah, so it's really beautiful.
Love it. Thank you. Hey, last thing. When's your next book coming out?
After the PhD.
After PhD, right.
But it's writing that big chunky document.
Right, and so let's wind this up. Everyone, if I was to impress upon you one action point from this podcast, I would say go out and get the book. Big Bites Break Boundaries. Try to say that 10 times really fast.
I can't even do that. So
Thank
you.
Mate, thank you so much for spending time with me again here on the John Daniels podcast. It was great. And thank you for the work that you do actually in Hong Kong. It's great for our community to have people like you out there doing stuff like you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you to everyone for listening, and share those stories and listen to many more.
And then if you want to reach out, there you go.
One of the ways to hear stories.
Tell your friends. Also, if you out there want to get in touch with Stephanie.
Woo! You can find me on Instagram at _the mighty munchkin _. The book has its own Instagram page too. It's Big Bites Break Boundaries. I think those are the quickest ways to reach me. You can also follow Body Banter at Body Banter.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so
get involved.
Really great. Woo.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. And thanks, Wilson. Awesome.
Navigated Mercury retrograde.
Oh, universe can't stop us, can they?
Heck no.
All right, dude. Thanks for tuning in again.
Thanks for tuning in.
I'll see you in 2 weeks' time with another episode. Hopefully nearly as good as this one. Thanks, guys. Speak to you soon. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
See you, mate.
It was so fun.